More than 2,300 years ago, Aristotle wandered through a night forest and noticed that decaying wood glowed. A cold green light without fire, without heat, without any explanation. He recorded the observation and moved on. He had no words for what he saw because science had yet to create a category for it. Aristotle thought it was a property of the wood. That wood simply had the ability to glow when it decayed. He was wrong. The mushrooms were the ones glowing. And you know what's the strangest part? 23 centuries have passed since then, and we still have a poor understanding of what mushrooms are. We've sent robots to Mars, decoded the human genome, photographed a black hole, but until the 19th century, some cultures seriously believed that mushrooms appeared from lightning striking the ground, lightning into the ground, and from there, a mushroom. This wasn't a metaphor. People genuinely thought this way because mushrooms appeared suddenly, unpredictably, and from nowhere. Let's clarify the basics. Mushrooms are not plants. They have no relation to plants at all. They don't photosynthesize, they lack chlorophyll, and they don't need sunlight for nourishment. Mushrooms represent a separate kingdom of life, as independent as animals or plants. In fact, they're closer to animals than to plants. This isn't an exaggeration, it's biochemistry. The cell wall of a mushroom contains chitin, the same substance that makes up the shell of a beetle or crab. Mushrooms breathe oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide, just like us. When you pick a porcini mushroom in the forest, you're holding an organism that, from a biochemical standpoint, is closer to you than to the tree it grew on. And this is where the real scale of the problem begins. According to the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew in London, there may be up to 3.8 million species of mushrooms on the planet. 3.8 million. Yet only 144,000 have been described. That's less than 4%. More than 96% of mushroom species on Earth don't even have names. They have no names. No one has seen them under a microscope, described them, or classified them. For comparison, there are about 11,000 species of birds on the planet, and we know nearly everyone. Each bird has been described, illustrated, and its song recorded. Mushrooms are the most understudied major kingdom of life on Earth, and that's not a figure of speech. Now let's talk about what a mushroom body can do, because this is where it gets a bit like science fiction. Mushrooms can create wind. Yes, their own wind. Some species release water vapor with such intensity that local air currents form around them. Why? To lift spores upward and spread them even when the air is completely still. This isn't passive waiting for a breeze to carry the spore. It's an active mechanism. The mushroom creates conditions for its own reproduction by generating air movement where there is none. But if you need one example that illustrates just how underrated mushrooms are as engineers, here it is: Pilobolus. This microscopic fungus lives on the dung of herbivorous animals. It's less than a centimetre tall, smaller than your pinky nail, and this organism possesses one of the most precise ballistic mechanisms in the natural world. Here's how it works. Inside the stalk of Pilobolus, fluid pressure builds up, and at a certain moment, the tip shoots a spore sac up to 2.5 meters away. The speed of the shot can reach up to 90 kilometers per hour. For an organism smaller than a centimeter, that's like a human throwing a ball 1.5 kilometers. But wait, that's not all. The tip of its stalk acts like a lens. It focuses sunlight, and the mushroom literally aims for the direction of maximum light. Why? Because light means open space, grass, pasture. Pilobolus shoots away from the dung pile it grew on, toward where animals graze. Spores stick to the grass. The animal eats the grass. The spores pass through the digestive tract unharmed, exit with the dung, and germinate anew. A complete cycle. A mushroom just half a centimeter tall shoots with precision through a lens to a distance 250 times its own height. Now let's travel back 420 million years. The Devonian period. There are no trees on land, none at all. The plants are tiny stalks just a few centimeters tall, huddled against the boggy ground. And in the midst of this flat, bare world stand columns. 8 meters high, 1 meter wide. No branches, no leaves, just pillars. This is Prototaxides. When the first fossil specimen was found in 1859, it was thought to be a coniferous tree. Logical. What else could be that size? Only a tree. But analysis showed that the structure didn't match any known plant. For almost a century and a half, scientists debated what it actually was, and only in 2007 did carbon isotope analysis confirm it was likely a fungus, or a fungus-like organism. The largest terrestrial organism of its time was a mushroom. Moreover, just recently, in 2025, a group of researchers from Edinburgh proposed something even stranger: that Prototaxides is neither a fungus nor a plant, that it represents a completely extinct, unknown branch of life that doesn't belong to any existing kingdom. If confirmed, this means that 400 million years ago, giant organisms lived on Earth, the nature of which we know absolutely nothing about. But even if Prototaxides was a fungus and not something unknown, it changes our worldview. We've been taught that life on land is a story of plants. First mosses, then ferns, then trees, forests, a green world. But before the green world, there was another world. A world where the tallest beings on the planet were fungal columns standing amidst boggy wastelands. Mushrooms ruled the land millions of years before the first tree appeared. They were here first. We tend to think of mushrooms as something small that grows after rain and is good for soup. A cap, a stalk, a basket. But what we see above ground is like an apple on an apple tree, a fruit, a temporary reproductive structure. The body of the mushroom itself is mycelium, a network of the finest threads that permeate the soil, wood, and forest litter. You don't see it, but it's there. Beneath every step you take in the forest lies a network older than trees as a biological form. And here's what truly strikes me. We live in a world where we can determine the atmospheric composition of a planet 40 light years away, but we don't know the names of 96% of the mushrooms under our feet. This isn't just a gap in knowledge, it's a blind spot the size of an entire kingdom of life. We literally walk over it every day and don't notice. In the next part, we'll talk about what mushrooms do with other organisms, and believe me, you'll see the forest in a whole new light. Because mushrooms don't just grow in nature, they manage it. In 2022, computer scientist Andrew Adamatsky from the University of West England did something unusual. He took tiny electrodes, thinner than a human hair, and connected them to mycelium, the underground network of fungal threads. 4 different species of mushrooms, and he began recording. What he saw on the monitor looked familiar. Rhythmic electrical impulses traveling along the fungal threads in waves. The impulses varied in strength, frequency, and duration. These weren't random electrical noises. They were repeating patterns. Adamatsky processed the data and proposed a model. If you break these chains of impulses into individual blocks, similar to how we break speech into words, it results in something like a lexicon. Up to 50 conditional words, with 15 to 20 used most frequently. A fungal dictionary. It sounds crazy, and it must be said right away. This is a hypothesis, not a proven fact. Skeptics rightly pointed out that similar rhythmic patterns could simply be a growth pulse, a reaction to damage, or a change in humidity. The coincidence with language structures could be purely statistical, like hearing the rhythm of drums and deciding it's Morse code. But here's what's indisputable. Mycelium possesses properties of electronic components. It works like a memory store and capacitor, and it can transmit frequency-modulated signals in the range from 100 to 10,000 hertz. This isn't a metaphor or a stretch. These are measured physical characteristics. The fungal network conducts information. What this information means, we don't know yet. But the very fact that structured electrical signals travel along fungal threads already overturns our understanding of what it means to be a stationary organism without a brain. All right, electricity is an invisible world. Let's move on to something you can see with the naked eye, to bioluminescence. Remember Aristotle and his cold fire on decaying wood? He wasn't the only one to notice it. Pliny the Elder, a Roman naturalist, saw glowing mushrooms on wood in olive groves. In medieval Scandinavia, people would break off pieces of glowing bark and place them along paths to find their way back from the night forest. Essentially, these were the first road signs based on mushrooms. Today we know that more than 70 species of mushrooms glow in the dark. The mechanism is based on the reaction of two substances, luciferin and luciferase. These are the same classes of molecules that make fireflies glow, but the fungal version is chemically different. Mushrooms and beetles arrived at bioluminescence independently, but the truly astonishing discovery came in 2015. A Brazilian-American research group studied the mushroom Neonothopanus gardneri, which grows in Brazilian tropical forests, and found that it regulates its glow on a schedule. It glows brightly at night and dims during the day. A mushroom without eyes, without a brain, and without a nervous system has a circadian rhythm, internal clocks, just like ours. And the glow isn't a side effect, it serves a specific purpose. The night light attracts beetles and small insects. They land on the mushroom, get covered in spores, and carry them away. Essentially, the mushroom does the same thing a flower does with its scent, attracting pollinators. Only the flower does it with fragrance and sunlight, while the mushroom does it with light in the dark. Now to things that might give you chills, but are important to know because they show how complex mushroom strategies are. There's a genus of fungi called Massospora. It parasitizes cicadas. When a spore lands on a cicada, the fungus begins to grow inside the insect and gradually replaces the back part of its body with a white plug of spores. The cicada doesn't die immediately. It continues to fly and even tries to interact with other cicadas, spreading the fungus's spores to healthy individuals with every contact. One researcher studying this process called the infected cicadas flying salt shakers because they scatter fungal spores everywhere they go. In 2018, a group of scientists from West Virginia University, led by Matt Casson, discovered something completely unexpected. It turned out that the fungus produces substances that affect the behavior of the infected cicada, making it more active and resilient, even despite losing part of its body. Massospora essentially reprograms the host behavior to its advantage. The cicada stops feeling that something is wrong and continues moving, spreading spores as far as possible. The fungus turns the insect into a vehicle for its own reproduction. This is a creepy strategy, but it demonstrates a level of biochemical complexity that we usually don't associate with mushrooms. We tend to think of them as something passive, just growing on a stump, not bothering anyone. But Massospora is an organism that chemically manipulates the behavior of another organism. Without a brain, without a nervous system, without any intention in the human sense, but with a result that looks like a well-thought-out plan. And if you think mushrooms only affect insects and trees, here's another scale: bananas. The very bananas you buy in the store. Until the 1950s, the main export banana in the world was the Gros Michel variety. It was larger, sweeter, and more aromatic than what we eat today. Banana candies still taste like Gros Michel, not the modern banana, because the recipes were created when that variety still existed. It was wiped out by a fungus, Fusarium, the cause of Panama disease. The fungus attacked the roots of banana plantations, and there was no salvation because all Gros Michel bananas were genetic clones of each other. Not a single specimen had resistance because they were all the same. Plantations across Central America had to be abandoned. The industry switched to another variety, Cavendish, the one we eat now. And guess what? A new strain of the same fungus, TR4, now threatens Cavendish as well. The same story could repeat itself. But bananas are just the tip of the iceberg. Phytophthora infestans, an organism on the border of fungi and oomycetes, caused the Great Irish Famine from 1845 to 1852. This microorganism devastated the potato crop, which was the staple food of Irish peasants. The harvest rotted right in the fields. About 1 million people died, and even more were forced to leave the country. The mass emigration from Ireland to the United States, which shaped America's demographics for decades to come, began because of a fungus-like organism that destroyed one type of root vegetable on one island. And what about ergot? A fungus that parasitizes rye. In medieval Europe, people ate infected bread and suffered from ergotism, a condition that disrupted blood circulation in the limbs, leading to gangrene, along with severe hallucinations. This was called St. Anthony's Fire, and entire villages suffered from it simultaneously, not understanding the cause. People thought it was a curse or punishment from above. It was a fungus in the bread. Mushrooms don't just exist alongside human civilization. They shaped it. They determined which peoples would starve and which would thrive, which varieties we would eat and which would disappear forever, which diseases we would treat for centuries without knowing their cause. When we talk about the forces that shaped history, we usually list wars, epidemics, and inventions. But mushrooms were behind many of these epidemics and losses. We just don't think about it. In the third part, we'll move on to how mushrooms became medicines, materials, and possibly the future of technology. And we'll start with a man who lived 5,300 years ago, who crossed an icy pass in the Alps with 2 mushrooms around his neck. In 1991, in the Alps, on the border of Austria and Italy, 2 tourists found a body in a melting glacier. At first, they thought it was a deceased climber, perhaps from the 20th century. Then they conducted an analysis and realized he was 5,300 years old. He was named Ötzi, the Iceman. He lived in the Neolithic era, long before the construction of the Egyptian pyramids. His clothing, weapons, and gear were preserved in perfect condition thanks to the ice. And among everything he had, there were 2 types of mushrooms strung on leather straps. The first mushroom was the birch polypore, Fomitopsis betulina. This mushroom contains agaric acid, which kills intestinal parasites. When Ötzi's body was examined, it was found that he was infected with a whipworm, the very parasite that the birch polypore helps against. This means Ötzi knew what he was sick with and knew how to treat it. 5,300 years ago, without a microscope, without a laboratory, without a medical education, he carried his pharmacy around his neck. The second mushroom was a tinder fungus. It was part of a fire-starting kit. The tinder fungus smolders easily and holds a spark for a long time, making it an ideal material for kindling. One mushroom healed, the other provided fire. Medicine and technology at once, and both of fungal origin. This wasn't a random selection. Ötzi deliberately chose these mushrooms and carried them across the icy mountain pass. Even then, humans understood that mushrooms were a resource essential for survival. 53 centuries have passed between Ötzi and us. During this time, mycology, the study of fungi, has developed slowly, much slower than botany or zoology. And one reason is that it filtered out people who could have advanced it. In the 1890s, there was a woman named Beatrix Potter. Yes, that Beatrix Potter, who later wrote Peter Rabbit and became one of the most famous children's authors in history. But before her literary career, Potter was a serious amateur mycologist. She studied mushrooms under a microscope, created detailed scientific illustrations that were as accurate as those of professionals, and wrote a research paper on the germination of fungal spores. She submitted her work to the Linnean Society of London, one of the oldest scientific societies in the world. But as a woman, she wasn't even allowed to enter the meeting hall. Someone else read her work, and it wasn't accepted. Potter left mycology and turned to children's literature. The world received wonderful children's books, but lost a scientist who could have advanced mycology in the early 20th century. More than 100 years later, the Linnean Society offered her posthumous apologies. Too late for science, but important as a fact, mycology lagged not because mushrooms are uninteresting, but because they were treated as something second-rate, and so were the people who studied them. Now, about how mushrooms have saved hundreds of thousands of lives, most people have never even heard of. Everyone knows about penicillin, an antibiotic from the fungus Penicillium. That's a story told in every textbook. But there's another story, equally important and far less known. The fungus Talipocladium inflatum parasitizes scarab beetles. From this fungus, a substance called cyclosporin was extracted. It sounds like the name of something industrial, but in reality, cyclosporin is a drug that made organ transplantation possible. Before cyclosporin, organ transplantation was a procedure with an extremely low success rate. The patient's immune system recognized the foreign organ as a threat and attacked it. A transplanted heart, liver, kidney, all were rejected. Cyclosporin suppresses the immune response just enough for the body to accept the foreign organ without completely destroying the immune system. Hundreds of thousands of people today live with transplanted organs thanks to a substance that the fungus produced for its own needs while infecting an insect. The fungus didn't know its biochemistry would save humans. It was just doing what it had done for millions of years. And we found a medicine in it. Alongside cyclosporin is another avenue, beta-glucans from shiitake mushrooms and Trametes versicolor. In Japan and China, preparations based on these substances are approved as adjunct therapy for cancer. They don't replace primary treatment, but help the immune system work more effectively. And that too came from mushrooms. Now let's move on to what mushrooms might offer us in the future, because this is where it starts to sound like the plot of a science fiction movie, but it's backed by real experiments. Remember Andrew Adamatsky and his electrodes in the mycelium? The electrical properties of fungal networks aren't just of academic interest. Mycelium has the properties of memristors, capacitors, and sensors. This means that theoretically, electronic circuits could be created from living mycelium. Biodegradable electronic circuits. Electronics that, after use, would simply decompose in the soil instead of sitting in a landfill for the next 500 years. We're still far from a fungal smartphone, but the very idea that a living organism can perform the functions of electronic components opens a direction that didn't even exist 10 years ago. The second avenue is plastics. Polyurethane decomposes in nature for centuries. Centuries. It sits in landfills, in oceans, in soil, and doesn't go anywhere. In Pakistan, a fungus called Aspergillus tubangensis was discovered on one of the landfills, capable of breaking down polyurethane in weeks. Not in centuries, not in decades, but in weeks. Other species of Aspergillus and Penicillium break down polyethylene in laboratory conditions. We've buried the planet in plastic, the production of which consumed billions of tons of oil, and the answer to the question, how to get rid of it, may lie in organisms we don't notice. The third story sounds straight out of science fiction. In Chernobyl, inside the ruined fourth reactor block, mushrooms containing large amounts of melanin, the same pigment that determines the color of our skin, were discovered. These mushrooms not only survive in high radiation backgrounds, they use gamma radiation for their metabolism. Radiation for them is a source of energy, much like sunlight is for plants. They are called radiotrophic fungi, and they are currently being considered as potential materials for radiation protection in space travel and even as possible food sources beyond Earth. Mushrooms that consume radiation and grow in the most dangerous place on the planet could be the key to our ability to live in space. The fourth avenue is materials. Right now, companies are growing mycelium in molds and producing materials that replace foam in packaging, leather in clothing and shoes, and building panels in architecture. Mycelium grows in days, doesn't require oil, and completely decomposes after use. The company that makes your shoebox might grow it from mushrooms in the future, and you wouldn't even notice the difference, except that the box won't sit in a landfill until the end of the century. Let's return to Ötzi. A man walked through the mountains 5,300 years ago. He had two mushrooms hanging around his neck. One healed, the other provided fire. Ötzi didn't know the word mycology and had no idea that mushrooms were a separate kingdom of life. But he knew he needed them. Today we know more than Ötzi. We know about the electrical signals of mycelium, about mushrooms that glow on a schedule, about organisms that break down plastic and feed on radiation. We know that one parasitic fungus gave us organ transplantation, while another wiped out an entire banana variety and devastated the economies of several countries. We know that 400 million years ago, mushrooms were the tallest beings on land. And despite all this, we've described less than 4% of species. 4%. Everything else is territory we haven't even stepped into yet. When people think of great unexplored spaces, they usually look up, into space, at the stars, at other planets, or down, into the depths of the ocean, into underwater trenches where light doesn't penetrate. But perhaps the most important things we still have to learn about life on this planet lie not in space and not in the ocean. They lie just a few centimeters of soil right beneath our feet, and they're waiting for us to finally pay attention.